in your sight, O God, our strength and our hope. Amen. For the longest time, we've called that story the parable of the prodigal son. For the longest time. And if you don't recognize the Bible story, you probably recognize the story from somewhere else, because it's such a meaningful story that it's been told in a variety of ways, in books and movies and just a variety of ways, and always, as the title suggests, focusing on the prodigal son. We've heard for a very, 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 very long time that we are like the prodigal son. We have lost our way from God, and we are invited to return to God because God's grace is so radical and so overwhelming and so just everything for everyone that we are called back to God. And we are found, we are brought home by God. And if you've heard that before, or you're hearing me say it now, I could stop right now, and that would be a sermon right there. Some of you are probably hoping I'm going to, but I'm not. That in itself, like I could, honestly, that in itself, I could stop right there and it would be meaningful. It'd be meaningful, I hope, for all of us, but in particular for some. For people who are feeling like they've lost their way. Okay. But there's more than one character in the story. In fact, I think there's at least 4 characters in the story. At least. And that's not even counting the ones like, where's his mom at in all of this? What about the servants? What are they thinking? What about the community in which they live? What about the pigs? What are the pigs thinking? I mean, imagine... Okay, don't imagine yourself as a pig, but just for a moment think, this guy is disgusted to be around us. Like, he can't think of anything lower than being someone who takes care of pigs. If you're a pig, that should hurt your feelings. But even within the story, there's 2 sons and a father. And the first son, the younger son, the one that the story seems to focus on, is the one who is not happy with his life. And he wants to go and apparently have one. And so he demands and receives his inheritance in order to go and do that. And so he does, and it does not go well, obviously. There's also the father who gives him that inheritance and lets him go, and then finds himself lost because he feels he's lost a son. He's grieving. He doesn't even know if the son's alive. And there's another brother. There's another son who seems, as we hear at the end of the story, seems to have lost his way a little bit too. Imagine spending all that time, those years after his brother leaves, feeling resentful that his brother got to leave. It's possible, I suppose, that he was happy staying and being the one on whom everything depended, because there's only one of them now, being the good son. Sure doesn't sound like it at the end there. But when the other brother returns, he seems a little resentful. Seems kind of like he's lost his way too. But there's a 4th character, I think, in this story. It's the character that overwhelms everything. It's grace. I think grace is literally a character in this story, because it's there for everyone. Not just Sure, the Father offers grace to the Son without any condition, without any concern for what may have happened to the Son, what the Son may do. But I also think the younger son who went off and lived this life that apparently we've somehow judged to be wrong, I'm coming back to that, so hold on to that thought. That's the one, prodigal, right? That's what the word means. Extravagant and wasteful, excessive. He's the one who's lived the prodigal life, right? So he's gone off and he's done that. And I think he's come to the realization that that's not where he wants to be. He wants to be home. He's lost his way and he wants to find his way home. There's lots of scholarship, by the way, that suggests that's not the case. Once a con man, always a con man. And that, in fact, that younger son has no intention of changing his ways. He just is hungry, and meal ticket, might as well go home. Congratulations, you're a Pharisee. Come back to that. I think that younger son offers himself grace to realize that there is a way forward. There's a way to be found. There's a way home. And so he takes it without the expectation that he's actually even going to be welcomed at all. The Father offers him grace, that unconditional, undemanding grace that says, wherever you have been, however you have been, you are loved. Without any expectation that anything's going to change, without demanding that he do anything, the Father simply celebrates his return. He's home. Wonder if that's a moment at which the Father offers himself a little bit of grace too. You know, I wonder if the other son, the older son, I wonder if the mother, the community, the servants, all thought for a moment that the father was being prodigal when he gave the son half of his money, gave him his inheritance now and let him go. What a waste. I wonder if they were all thinking that. I don't think he was. But you could certainly make an argument for him being prodigal in the sense of, but also grace and hope. But grace is offered to the son when he comes home. Grace in a party. The other son, well, you could certainly make an argument for the other son being prodigal too, actually, while we're on the subject. I mean, if that wasn't really the life he wanted and he's resentful of having been the good son who stayed behind and did everything he was supposed to do, maybe that wasn't the life he wanted. Maybe he feels like he's wasted his life. The story, though, doesn't end with any resolution around that. That one's left hanging. Does the father's words move the other son? Does the grace that the father has offered to the younger son, the grace that the father offers to the older son, the love that is offered there, does it move him? We don't hear about that. We don't hear about whether or not the younger son changes his ways. We don't hear about what happens going forward. Here's the thing about the whole story, though. The reason for Jesus telling it is that he overheard some people saying You hang out with the wrong people. You hang out with sinners. You should be hanging out with us good, God-fearing, church-going folk. Really? That's why you think Jesus would appear, is to cozy up to the people who are already at least thinking they were doing the right thing. I think the point of the story is the older son is being the Pharisees. The older son seems to have found himself thinking, I'm the good son. I did all the right things. And yet, here you are, fawning over the one who sinned, who turned away, who ran off, the prodigal one. It's the same Jesus telling this story who elsewhere we're going to hear warning people to beware of Pharisees and leaders in the temple who show off appears like they're doing all the right things, but really they're not. They're not living the word. They're not living the law out. This is a story that's a little bit like, actually I'm torn about this now because I was going to say this is a story that's a little bit like how Shrek describes ogres. If you remember the story of Shrek, he's talking to Donkey. And if you don't know this story, you actually should watch the movie or the stage show because it's going to sound ridiculous. But he's trying to explain to him what ogres are like, and he says they're like onions. Not because they're stinky and give you bad breath, but because they have layers. I'm torn a little bit, though, whether it's like an onion or an artichoke, where you peel the pieces off, and there's some fruit there. Yeah. But that's the thing. This is a story where each character in this story gives you something. Each character gives you something. Each character has grace. That's why I think that's the fourth and most important character in the story. Is what happens when grace is present. What happens when grace is offered. What happens when grace is received? So, for those who are aware, you may have been wondering this morning if Robin was going to say anything about what happened to our wings. If you're not aware and didn't notice when you came by them this morning, somebody took a can of green spray paint to them and put a big X through the wings and sprayed over Kyle's name. So what are we going to do about that? We're going to offer grace. We're going to offer forgiveness and understanding. What else would we do? What else would we do? In a world where there's so much, I'm going to guess that prodigality is a word. Somebody help me out if it isn't. If it isn't, I just made one up. Prodigaliciousness. I'm not sure what to do with that word. But there is so much waste going on right now through things like anger and war and conflict and destruction of things through envy and resentfulness. The world needs grace. And every so often, in the midst of all of that stuff that's happening in the world, you see moments of it. You do see moments of it. And you can also see what happens when grace is present. You can see how it changes things. You can see how it moves people. Because all our journeys are different. Whether you see yourself as the character in the story who lost their way and needed to find their way home because of the life that they were living, well, you know what? That's all of them, isn't it? It doesn't matter which of those three characters you relate to the most. In their own way, each of them has lost their way and are looking to be found. And the character in the story that offers that offers home, is grace. It's the character that offers life, love, newness. That's God's love at work in the world. That's grace. It's amazing.